Is that the YouTube?
Let's YouTube. Okay, so YouTube's good. And then here is Facebook. And there we go. We are live.
Hello and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and our very special guest author today is USA Today bestselling Jillian Cantor, whose new book is Beautiful Little Fools. We're also extremely lucky to have with us as a special guest host, Edgar Award-winning and New York Times bestselling Heather Gudenkauf, whose chilling new suspense novel, The Overnight Guest, is also just out. Now, before we begin chatting, I do want to pause for a brief commercial message. The Poison Pen does have a few copies signed by Jillian of Beautiful Little Fools that are up for grabs and available for sale, as well as copies of Heather's new book, The Overnight Guest. In fact, she'll be coming to Arizona next week to do a special event in person here at the store. So if you find after listening to these ladies that you cannot live without reading their books, and trust me, you will not be able to live without reading their books, we do have copies here available. Just give us a call or go online to the bookstore's webpage. We'll be happy to hold a copy or send one out to you in the mail. And now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Jillian and Heather.
Hello, it's so great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to let Heather add some questions in, but I'll start off with the first one because I'm always fascinated by authors, who they were before they became an author. So Jillian, can you tell us a little bit about yourself before you started writing books?
Sure. So I started writing books when I was a sophomore in college. So I don't know that there was that much of me before I started writing books. I was a teenager. And you know, I really have been, this is Beautiful Little Fools. Right here is my 11th novel, and I've been publishing books since 2008 and pretty much writing full time since like 2012. So I think I was always a writer in some capacity. I was always a reader, you know, even as a little kid, I was just a voracious reader. And so I was kind of always thinking about stories and had my head in a book. And so it's like, it's hard to remember that, you know, there was this different person before that. I don't know that there really was. I did teach English for a few years, but I was still writing at the same time. So I was a writer then also.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your new book, Beautiful Little Fools?
Sure. So Beautiful Little Fools is a reimagining of the world of the Great Gatsby, but from the women's points of view. And it's set before, during, and after the original novel, but it's sort of part murder mystery as there's a detective who tries to figure out who shot Jay Gatsby and suspects 3 women, and like part historical novel that's kind of delving into the lives of these women during this particular time. And it's part, you know, reimagining of a classic because you're re-seeing the world of Gatsby, but through totally different perspectives.
Because the original by F. Scott Fitzgerald was the male point of view, so you chose female.
Yes, the original was narrated by Nick, who's a little bit of an outsider, which kind of always fascinated me about The Great Gatsby. You know, why F. Scott Fitzgerald chose the one character that was on the outside to narrate it. And that's what almost always drew me to the book as a writer when I would come back and read it again and again. And I think Nick's perspective of everyone is so much different than anyone else's would be in the book, and especially the women. I was always drawn to thinking about what the women might be thinking.
And the title that you chose actually comes from a quote from one of the characters. Beautiful Little Fools.
Yeah, in the original Great Gatsby, Daisy's talking to her cousin Nick, and she's talking about when her child was born, and she said that she hoped that he would be a boy. And then when she found out that the baby was a girl, she said, well, if she's a girl, then I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. So that's always been one of my favorite lines from the novel. Nick kind of accepts it as fact, but I've always thought that, you know, Daisy was not a fool. And so that's sort of what I set out to explore.
you actually, in the same way that you chose a female point of view for your reimagining, you kind of subvert the idea of women as fools because you have some very strong female characters.
Yeah.
Jillian is pursuing a career in professional golf.
Yes.
Myrtle is out there campaigning for the vote. Was that a conscious choice? You wanted to show just how women really were strong at that time period?
Yeah, I mean, I always write about strong women. I think that's what I'm just drawn to, no matter what time period I'm writing. But the fact that Jordan had a golf career was in the original novel. We know that. So I felt like she had to have sort of been tough and a little bit different for the time because, that was what was important to her. Catherine, who is Myrtle's sister, is in the original novels, just mentioned 2 brief times. And she's the one that I made a suffragette. And so that was sort of my own creation because I wanted her to be sort of tough and strong. And there's a line where she says she wanted to be someone. She didn't want to be someone's husband. She just wanted to be someone. And that sort of contrasts Myrtle, who wants, this like wealthy husband to take care of her.
The book does explore a couple themes that I thought were interesting. One was sisters, the idea of sisters. They play in a person's life, and the other was the role of a home and how you orient yourself in your life. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, I mean, Daisy and Tom, for the theme of home, they're always moving around. And the original Gatsby, Nick says they went wherever people were rich and they played polo, and they just kind of go from place to place. Tom takes his polo ponies with him. They move, they're married for only a few years when the original Great Gatsby is set in the summer of 1922, but they've moved like 3 or 4 times in that time. And I traced that in my book as well. And in the original Gatsby, Daisy says to her cousin Nick that East Egg was going to be their permanent home. But of course, we see by the end of the Great Gatsby 3 months later that that's not possible because they've just left this trail of destruction in their wake. And so I felt like for Daisy, who, grew up in Louisville and like that was, her family's home, her family's history, that she would feel unmoored and that would be sort of a theme that came back to her. And I also have to say, as I was writing the first draft of this book, there was a really big fire in Tucson and in the mountains behind my house and like extreme close to us, to the point where like I was finishing the draft of the book and also we were like packing everything because we were like in the next evacuation zone to go. So I was definitely thinking a lot about home and what home means, and like if a home is a place or home is things or home is people. And so that made its way into the novel as well. And then the other thing you asked me was about sisters, right?
Yeah.
So Catherine and Myrtle are in the original Great Gatsby, but like I said, Catherine's a very small role. We just know she's Myrtle's younger sister and she has a red bob, and that's about all we know about her. But I was kind of fascinated with exploring that relationship and thinking about how they might be different as sisters and similar. And I also gave Daisy a sister who's not mentioned in the original Gatsby, but I was interested in exploring that idea of sisters. So I gave Daisy a sister Rose as well.
Heather, do you want to jump in with a question?
Sure. So Jillian, congratulations on just another stunning read. You know how much I love your books.
Thank you. The feeling's mutual because I love your books too.
Thank you. So this book hit the trifecta for me. Okay. It's historical fiction, which I love. It's got this great murder mystery and multiple perspectives. And so, I mean, this is like a present wrapped in a present wrapped in a present for me. So I just absolutely loved it, but people shouldn't take my word for it, because in a starred review from Publishers Weekly, they said Cantor succeeds brilliantly with this audacious revisionist murder mystery featuring characters from The Great Gatsby. Cantor successfully captures the style and tone of 1925 with vivid details, proving once again that it is hard to forget the past. Cantor's admirably convincing act of literary skullduggery, perfect word.
That's my favorite word.
Yeah, offers many rewards, and I couldn't agree more. So let's talk about first lines, though. The first line in this book is just absolutely yanked me into the story. So it says, and it's a short line. She said, you say, she held the gun the way a certain kind of careless man held his glass of whiskey. Okay, so I was immediately reminded of film noir. Yeah, it's just so visual. How did you go about capturing the essence and of the Roaring Twenties as you wrote?
I reread The Great Gatsby a lot as I was writing. I mean, I reread it several times before I even started, just to kind of go through. And that's where I did my skullduggery, I guess, where I was just pulling out, quotes and scenes and images. And so there's so much imagery of the Roaring Twenties in that book that was really the majority of my research. And just looking at the language and what people were wearing and, what they were drinking during Prohibition and how often they were drinking during Prohibition. So I feel like I really got just the mood of that time just by rereading the original a lot. I watched I watched all the Gatsby movies before I started too. So I feel like that was a visual representation, but I watched like some other movies that were set during that time just to sort of get a feel for it. But the first line I remember came to me before I had the plot sketched out, or, I really knew what was going to happen. I knew that it was going to be a murder mystery, and I knew that there was going to be a detective investigating who shot Gatsby, but I didn't know anything else yet. Like I didn't know who had shot Gatsby in my own mind. Oh. And I wrote down that line, and it stayed the whole time. But that was the first thing the first thing that came to me, and I just like had this picture of it, and then I sort of went from there.
It was perfect. I mean, it was like, here we go. The first line. So it was just fabulous. Now, when did you first read that? You talk about, you've read it several times. So when was the first time you read The Great Gatsby?
So I first read it in high school, and I think it was the first classic book that I was assigned to read that I just truly loved. And I read it again in college. I still have my college copy. It's sitting on my desk. I kept it. And then I would come back to it again, like every year or two, I would reread it again. And I don't often reread books. I usually read a book and I'm done. But The Great Gatsby, there's just something about it that every time I would read it, I would remember why I love to write and why I like to tell stories. And I felt like I would learn something about writing. But I also love it as a reader just because it's this, like, it's slim. I mean, it's a short read, and it's just this picture of this time in American life, but it's also so dramatic, and there's affairs and there's murder and there are these horrible people doing horrible things, and you can't look away. So yeah, I probably read it like 10 times in my life before I, came to this novel, just over the last maybe 25 years or so.
Yeah. So why this novel? I mean, why did you settle at this time in your writing on the great, this reimagining?
Yeah. So I've always thought about the women every time I reread it, and I would always kind of think to myself, like, I wish I knew more about the women. I wish the women are so central to the plot, because it's all about Daisy's, or Gatsby's obsession with Daisy, and, Tom's obsession with cheating on Daisy, and then Tom having an affair with Myrtle, and then Jordan comes and disrupts everything. And so they're so central, but they barely talk in the original novel, and they're just these sort of side characters. So I would always think about them, and I would always think I would want to know more. And I have a good friend who lives near me, and in pre-pandemic times, we would go to lunch once a month and just sort of like discuss story ideas, discuss what we were working on. And so we went to lunch, I think it was like December 2019. And I just said to her, I'd love to write a novel from Daisy's point of view. And she would not let me leave the lunch until I promised her that I would write it someday. And so I was like, okay, I'll write it someday. And I think it was the next day, sort of serendipity, I happened to see an article, I think it was in USA Today, talking about the fact that the copyright was expiring on The Great Gatsby the following year. So it expired last January 2021. And so I was like, oh, maybe this is the right time to write this novel because the copyright's about to expire. This would be the time to really play around with it. And I felt like I had to do it. And I think I wrote the book I always wanted to read. I was always curious. I always wanted to know more about them. And so I kind of wrote it for myself first.
Yeah. And don't you think, I think those turn out to be the best novels as a reader and as a writer, when you make that conscious decision that this is the book that I want to write.
It was definitely the most fun I have ever had writing a book. So it was just a really enjoyable experience because I was telling the story that I always wanted to know the answer to.
Yeah. So tell us more about the actual writing of it. Because I envision you sitting, in this big leather chair at a desk with sipping gin Rickies while you're typing. What was it like?
Yeah, it was, drastically less glamorous than that. I'm sitting right here. I have a little velour chair that I'm sitting in. And I wrote it. So I had started it right before the pandemic, like January 2020, I started it and I sold it to my editor on just 50 pages and an outline in February of 2020. So I think it was like February 28th, 2020, when I got this deal. And, I said that the first draft would be done. I think it was by July 1st. Wow. So I was like, oh, I had it all, the outline sketched out. I was like, I'm going to just leisurely write the rest of this. Then of course, 2 weeks later, here comes the pandemic and my kids were home and we were all at home. And at first I stopped writing because we thought we were only going to have 2 weeks of, 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Together time, right?
Right. I took 2 weeks off and then I realized, okay, wait, I have to write this book and it's due July 1st. And so I did. And it was actually, I was really glad that I had it because I feel like it sort of saved my sanity during that time. But, it was mostly me in sweatpants. I didn't really leave my house for those 3 months because no one was going anywhere. We didn't have anything to do. And so I was just sort of writing it at all hours of the day. And normally I have a schedule that's very structured around my kids' schedules because I'll write when they're at school. And then, if they have activities at night, which they always do, I'll go to those or I'll be driving them. So I would normally just write between 8 and 3 and then I would put it down. But in those 2020 spring months, no one was going to school. No one had activities. I was barely getting dressed and I was just writing all day. And I found myself being really productive between the hours of 3 and 8 p.m., which I would normally never write then because I would be out of the house doing something. And so it was kind of interesting that when I wasn't interrupted, I didn't have these sort of artificial time markers where I had to leave. I could just keep writing. And I actually found it was really fun and it was great to escape into the characters. But I didn't have any gin Rickies while I was writing until I finished the first draft. And then I was like, I need to make a gin Ricky to celebrate. So that was what I did to celebrate. That was the only time I had a gin Ricky.
Oh, well deserved. So you kind of referred to this a little bit about outlining. So do you consider yourself a plotter rather than a pantser?
I actually don't. I'm always a pantser, but for this novel, I was a plotter because I think it was because I was trying to stick to the timeline set out in the original and a lot of quotes from the original. I felt like, well, I have to at least sketch something out. I couldn't just kind of start and then figure it out, which is what I normally do. So I ended up making this extremely detailed outline, chapter by chapter outline. And I stuck to it for the whole thing. And it was actually a really fun experience. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to repeat it. I'm working on something now that I'm not outlining. And I want to, but I feel like it's messing with my creative process for what I'm doing now. So I haven't. But yeah, this was the one and only time that I did a detailed outline.
Wow. Yeah. I'm just
Do you do an outline? I'm always curious about that.
No. I start with an idea and just start writing.
Yeah, that's normally what I do.
Yeah. But I'm always in just awe of outliners.
Yeah, so am
I'm so
I, because
impressed.
I can't figure it out. But I
Yeah.
think I made the timeline first because I wanted to stick to the timeline that F. Scott Fitzgerald set out in the book. You know, The Great Gatsby only takes place over 3 months, but they tell you, you know, in dialogue and other little like backstory scenes where everyone was from 1917 on. So I sketched all of that out. And then when I started thinking about where they were, there were also particular quotes from those times or like scenes that were mentioned. So I started to put those in. And then before I knew it, I had an outline.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, and you were talking about writing during the pandemic, and there was a brief mention in the book of the influenza scare.
Yeah.
And I perked up a little bit. I'm like, that's right. You know, and
Yeah.
this takes place a little bit after that, I believe, but your story does. But did you see other parallels between then and now while you wrote?
Yeah. And to be honest, I didn't really think about the influenza pandemic when I sold the book in February of 2020. By the end of March, when I went back to it, I realized this is taking place during some of this pandemic. I have to figure out how to get it into the book. And I went down this like huge rabbit hole of research where I spent like a week researching the 1918-19 pandemic. And what I learned is that it came in waves. And none of the months when my book was set during those years were pandemic waves. And so I could not figure out how to get it in. And then I also thought, well, Daisy and Jordan are very like, you know, involved in their own lives. They probably weren't worrying about the pandemic as much as maybe some other people were. So I did end up adding a line where Jordan talks about the fact that some of the golf tournaments got delayed because of the pandemic, because I felt I had to say something.
Yeah.
But it was like I knew that happened during that time, but it didn't really resonate with me until I was writing it during a similar time. And of course, the Roaring 20s and thinking about why they came about was also really interesting. You know, writing this in a pandemic, it's like I understood why they were having so many parties, because World War I had just ended and they had just come through this like horrible pandemic. And of course, they were going to be having parties all the time and doing all this fun stuff because, you know, why not? And I felt certain, I knew this book was going to come out in 2022. And I kept thinking, all right, well, that's going to be our Roaring 20s. And, you know, we're not there yet, obviously.
Not quite. Hopefully soon. Hopefully soon. And I was struck also about just your women characters, of course, and how forward in the sense of time, like in society, they were way ahead of their time, even Daisy in a way. And it just made me think, you know, Jordan was exploring her sexuality, and Myrtle was, you know, on the front lines, not Myrtle, Catherine was on the front lines, you know, getting out the vote. And it just, you know, reminded me that of all the women that came before us who were trying to set the stage to make life better for everybody. And so what about that drew you to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I said before, I'm always kind of drawn to women who are strong and are fighting for something. You know, I've written about women who are in the resistance several times. And so I think this sort of ties into that. But also I felt like we still have so much in common with these women. Sadly, 100 years later, you know, there's still so many things to fight for, particularly for women. And I, you know, I feel that too as a woman writer, and I'm sure that you know, notice that also. It sort of seems like we're always kind of like fighting for equality in one way or another. So I was like fascinated at looking at these women in this earlier time who had more to fight for than we did. And I think in the original, the women don't really have a voice. And I wanted to give them a voice. And I felt like, you know, real women, even if they didn't have as much power as men in this particular time, they would still want things, and they would still have dreams, and they would still have this inner strength. And I really wanted to show that. I didn't want it to be, you know, just about Jay Gatsby. I wanted it to be about Daisy. And I think in the original, Nick is so enamored with Jay Gatsby. He just has these rose-colored glasses and loves everything that Jay Gatsby does. And I was trying to think about it from Daisy's point of view. And I thought, here's this guy that she dated 5 years earlier that she broke up with. And then she moves into this new house in East Egg that she thinks is going to be her permanent home. And he moves across the sound from her and like stares at the light at the end of her dock every night. And it felt so stalkery to me that I just kind of saw it in a different perspective and thought, like, you know, Nick thinks that this is true love, but I don't think that that's true love if you're a woman and you're experiencing that attention.
No, and it's just, yeah, it does shed a whole new light on it, and just really, her rose-colored glasses fall away quickly. For Jay. I mean, she's, you know, she has some fond memories, but she wants to, you know, get on with her life, her marriage, her child, and yeah. So your website has the most incredible book club kit I think I've ever seen. So why is this such a great book for book clubs? First of all, why would book clubs need to go out and choose this for one of their book clubs coming up?
That's a good question. And the book club kit, actually, my publisher designed that. So I did write the content, but they did make it look amazing. So I agree.
Yeah, well, the content's amazing.
It has like drink recipes and like references from the original. And yeah, so it would be really fun for book clubs. You know, I think there's a lot to talk about for book clubs, just as the book on its own, because I think it deals with a lot of issues like with women and history, and it's a mystery. And I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of ethical choices in the book too. I mean, all three of the women, you know, do some pretty terrible things, but I don't know that they're necessarily terrible people. So I just think there's a lot to discuss. But then, of course, if you wanted to pair it with the original Great Gatsby, there would even be more to discuss, because you could kind of see, you know, where the two intersect. And I think most of us have read The Great Gatsby in high school, or, you know, we've definitely seen the movie. And even if you haven't, I mean, you definitely don't have to read Beautiful Little Fools, but I think it could be a really interesting pairing, and people have a lot to talk about. And there are great drink recipes in that book club.
I was just
my editor helped with. She helped come up with those, so it would be a really fun book club.
Jordan's pink gin and tonic sounds like really good. Yeah, there's all kinds.
There are some really good drink recipes in there.
Yes. Well, and we were both in education, and so I was kind of reading it through that lens too, because I read it, you know, in school as well. The Great Gatsby. And I think, wouldn't it be an amazing pairing in high school or, you know, college to do your book and to see those parallels? I just think the conversations and the teaching and the composition, you know, lessons and education that could go along with it would just be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be a really interesting discussion to do that for sure, and kind of, you know, see where they dovetail. And I do have a little like cheat sheet in that book club kit that kind of tells you quotes from The Great Gatsby that play a prominent part in my book.
Yes. Yeah, it's so good. Yeah. So book clubs out there just need to schedule this one, and just full of great conversation. John, I don't want to take up all the space here. Do you have any more questions?
I do have a couple for both. Okay. We'll start with one for Jillian. I was reading somewhere something that you had said. Let me see if I can find it. Well, it's kind of under the theme of, like in life, we all like to label things because it makes it easy. You can fit things into a box if you're a reader, if you're a publisher. It just, in general, it can help you find what you want. But there's also a downside to that. And I think you talked at one point about the label of women's fiction and how it kind of is a two-edged sword in some respect.
I did. I wrote an essay for Lit Hub talking about women's fiction, and it was talking about the fact that, you know, the plot in my book is essentially the plot in The Great Gatsby, but my book has been labeled women's fiction, and The Great Gatsby has never been labeled women's fiction. And why, you know, switching from a male narrator to a female narrator gives it that label. And whether it's a positive label or a derogatory label. I mean, I think it tends to have sort of a derogatory connotation. I mean, I read books labeled women's fiction all the time. I love reading books by women and about women. And but there's somehow this implication that if it's called women's fiction, men can't read it. So I did write an essay about that. I've gotten some very interesting comments from some men on Twitter who took offense to that, but
Well,
so I guess I did something right. I don't know.
you must have.
You're making people think.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a label for men's fiction. It's like we don't put
Right. Yeah, that was my point. It's either
Right.
that's just fiction, and of course I read that all the time too. And
So I guess we have to trick men into reading your book by just calling it fiction. So they will.
yeah, but it is labeled women's fiction. I think, you know, everywhere you would see it.
Interesting.
My other
So,
question, that's okay. Go ahead, Heather.
no, go right ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you, talked in another essay or something that I saw about the importance of point of view and narrator to you as an author. Can you expand a little on that?
Yeah, I'm always interested in point of view and thinking about how looking through a different lens would change the story completely. And I think that's something that I think about in all my books where, you know, I either have multiple narrators or I'm telling maybe a story we know from someone else's perspective. And I think that's especially true in Beautiful Little Fools. And also what drew me to The Great Gatsby. You know, F. Scott Fitzgerald could have told The Great Gatsby from Jay Gatsby's point of view, and it would have been a totally different book than telling it from Nick, who's like a little bit removed from all of them. And I felt like telling the same exact events from Daisy's point of view would automatically be a different story just because Daisy's, you know, a woman, but she's also a different person than Nick. And so that's what I have the most fun thinking about as a writer. And I know, Heather, you always write from multiple perspectives too, and do it so well. And so I would be curious also to hear your answer to that question.
Yeah, you know, for me, well, thank you. For me, I just always feel like a story, my stories have to be told from multiple points of view to tell for the reader to get the full effect of the story. And I kind of think of it as like a runner passing the baton from character to character to move the story forward. Yeah, I love reading books in multiple perspectives, and I really love writing that way too.
And I think it makes the world richer. You know, you see more when you have a chorus of voices than when you just, my dog's gonna bark, than when you just see one. There's something sort of beeping outside and I was just waiting for it.
Well, Heather, do you find that, especially in suspense and mystery, that multiple point of views really does help? Because if you're trying to throw doubt or shift then you've got lots of choices.
Yeah, well, I know when I was reading Beautiful Little Fools and like the ending, it was like, wow. And I kind of pride myself on being able to figure out who done it in books. And Jillian, you laid the groundwork, but I didn't know. And it was just absolutely brilliant.
That's great. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant.
That is high praise coming from you because I feel like your mysteries are so well crafted. So I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you. So if you had a chance to chat with F. Scott Fitzgerald, what do you think, what would your conversation be about your books, do you think?
That's a really interesting question. You know, I people have been asking me what I think he would think of Beautiful Little Fools. And I wonder, you know, how he would feel about a woman telling the woman's side of the story. I'm not sure because, you know, obviously he's from a different time than we were. But one thing that I think is really fascinating is that The Great Gatsby was both a commercial and critical failure when it first came out. It barely sold any copies the first year it was published. It actually didn't take off until after Fitzgerald's death. So he never even knew that it did well. He thought it was a failure when he died. So I think to have a conversation with him, I just imagine as an author, what he would think about the fact that here we are like almost 100 years later, and look how many copies of his book are being read and sold every day. And it's like, you know, everyone knows The Great Gatsby. And I don't think that's something he would have been able to fathom, you know, when he was in it. And I think, you know, as writers, we often are experiencing failure and rejection. You know, it's just kind of part of the thing. And I feel like he would be so astounded if he saw what had happened with The Great Gatsby. So that would be a really interesting conversation to have, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think he'd be thrilled, because what highest form of praise to an author is to
see how many copies are in print so many years later, that I think,
well, and to have another author so invested and love, you know, his story and want to delve into it more deeply. I just think I think he'd be thrilled. He'd be thrilled. So yeah. Okay, what are you reading now? What's on
I am actually reading a book called The Overnight Guest.
I was not fishing.
I really am. It's on my iPad right here. I was reading it before we got on the Zoom. I'm about 20%. I started it this morning, and it's so good. I love your books. Okay. And I'm going to finish it when we get off with a glass of wine, as I told you. But no, I like truly am. That is what I'm reading. I've just finished The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis. I did an event with her the other night, and that was a really good book. Also a little bit of a mystery, historical with multiple points of view. She always writes these really great books about like famous buildings in New York. And this one is about the Frick House, which I knew nothing about. You know, I don't know New York as well as her. So that was fascinating too. And then what else am I reading? Oh, also I finished a few weeks ago, I got to read an early copy, my friend author Brenda Janowitz's book, The Liz Taylor Ring, which also just came out on Tuesday. And that was really good. I highly recommend.
I'm excited to read that one too. Both of those that you mentioned. Yeah. So
what are you reading now?
So I am I'm listening, I'm listening to Alice Feeney's Rock, Paper, Scissors, which is a great audio. But I just started a couple books, Like a Sister by Kelly Garrett, which comes out this spring. And very good. And I'm a multi-book reader too. I read more than one book at a time. And A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham, which is a debut author.
I keep seeing stuff about that one. I want to read that one.
Yeah, it's very good. Very good. So, and now you do have to tell us, what are you working on, or can you?
I can't really tell you, but I am working on something. And it's sort of another feminist take on a different classic. And hopefully I'll be able to talk about it more soon.
Yeah. Oh, that's so exciting. So exciting. John, do you have any other questions for Jillian?
I have a couple for Jillian and then a couple for you, Heather. So
gosh.
I'll start with Jillian. Beautiful Little Fools is not the first time you've reimagined a classic, is it? You actually did that earlier with the young adult novel.
No, that's true. It's behind you. I see it. Yeah. The Code for Love and Heartbreak is a retelling of Jane Austen's Emma set in modern day high school. And it's a young adult novel. My Emma is the president of her high school coding club, and she makes an app that matchmakes her classmates with disastrous results.
I can gather the book is wonderful that you're a fan of Austen and of Emma. I sometimes think the character Emma gets a bad rap because people call her difficult and unlikable, but she's just trying to do what she thinks is right for other people.
Yeah, and my Emma she's really good at math, and as she says, I think in the first line of the book, she gets math and she doesn't get people, and so of course disaster ensues when she tries to use math to set people up.
You mentioned that you had watched all of the movies for The Great Gatsby. Do you have a favorite? Is there one you would tell people don't watch this because it will ruin the book for you?
Oh, well, I mean, I would say you could watch them all. I found one that I didn't know about when I was just trying to watch everything that was out there. And it was a version where Paul Rudd plays Nick. And I had to actually order it on DVD from like a, a used bookstore online because it wasn't on any of the streaming services. But I think that was actually my favorite version to watch. Of course, anything Paul Rudd does, I love. And he was a really good Nick. But I didn't even know that one existed until I went digging for it.
And have you read any of the other reimaginings of The Great Gatsby? Because I know they've been kind of coming out.
Yeah, I haven't yet. I know there's two. There's one called Nick, and then The Chosen and the Beautiful, which I think is about Jordan, but it's like more of a fantasy. I'm not, is it a YA? I'm not sure.
I think they're calling it YA,
yeah, but I haven't. I want to, and I'm going to, but I felt like I had to, do my own and not get anything else in my head.
Heather, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as a writer and maybe give us a tease for the overnight guest?
Sure. So I write thrillers. My ninth one, The Overnight Guest, just came out a week ago, and a little over a week ago. And it's the story of a true crime writer who travels to the middle of Iowa to an old farmhouse in order to finish up her true crime book. And while she's working, 100-year storm blows in, a blizzard, and she opens up her front door and finds a young child in the snow. And she brings the child in, and then there's the mystery surrounding who the child is, why the child's there. And although they are isolated and it's very remote, someone will do anything to get inside the house.
Why do you love books set in snowy weather? Is that because you have a long history of reading those kind of books, Heather?
Yeah, yes. I guess because I live in Iowa and we have long, hard winters and we have long, hot summers, and feels like the extremes. And I just really enjoy writing books that take setting as well as climate and weather, and make that part of almost like a character in the book.
Yeah, I think one of your previous books was set in some caves or something like that in the area, and that you really were able to like put the reader right in those subterranean kind of.
Yeah, thank you. And a lot of people don't know that Iowa has caves, and we certainly do. Yes. So yeah, it was fun to write.
Now, my next question is for both of you. I'll let Jillian start. You've been writing for a while. Your careers have taken off. As you look back, what do you know now as a writer that you wish someone had told you when you were first starting out?
That is a really good question. I think I wish someone had told me that, it was a long game, that just to kind of keep my head down and keep writing and not stress about, every review or every review I didn't get or every sort of rejection, and just kind of keep going, and that I was going to be in it for the long haul. I think I might have stressed a little bit less in the meanwhile.
Heather?
Yeah, I echo that. It is the long game. And I would tell myself that, and we kind of talked about this earlier, to write the book that you want to read. And I think as long as you do that as a writer, it continues to be fun and exciting, and just something that, I want to keep doing. And that there's good days and bad days, just like with anything, and just to keep plugging ahead.
What is your relationship, both of you, with social media as an author, and how can readers learn more about you and your books? Why don't we start with you, Heather?
Sure. Yeah, it's so much fun connecting with readers, and, social media does make it much easier. So I can be found on Twitter, which I haven't figured out yet, really, but I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And yeah, I love hearing from readers and connecting. It's a good, fun way to do that.
Yeah, same. I'm also love hearing from readers, and I love that it's so easy and accessible. And I think Instagram is my favorite because we get to see people take these beautiful pictures of my book and then tag me. And I love seeing that. That always makes me happy. So you can definitely find me. I'm just at Jillian Cantor on Instagram and Twitter. And I think author Jillian Cantor on Facebook, but I'm on Instagram the most. Like Heather said, I think I also haven't really figured out Twitter. I'm retweeting a lot on Twitter. I'm afraid to say anything.
Same.
I think we do have a few questions from some of your fans, so I'll go ahead and get those.
I'll just say it.
Okay.
Jillian, just a quick question for you. Does Zelda Fitzgerald interest you much, and have you read much about her?
I mean, I did read, there were like 2 Zelda novels that came out at the same time, Z, and then I think Zelda was the one that Erica Roebuck wrote. And I definitely read both of them when they came out. But I haven't, read much about her since, but she's completely fascinating. But yeah, there were 2 really great novels on her already.
Yeah, and just one other question from me. Have you seen or read the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead?
I did, not since college, but yeah, I did. It's kind of a similar type. Yeah, I loved it.
It's such a great conceit, seeing the story that you think so well, kind of turned on its head by other characters.
Yeah. Really. And Wicked is another one where I love. Yeah.
Right. We've had, as far as questions from the audience, a lot of them are just comments about how much they love both of your books, actually. Both authors' books, that is. And there's a comment, a nice comment from a teacher who's saying, thanks for this opportunity for us. She's planning on teaching The Great Gatsby soon to her, I think it's to her high school students. And this is a nice kind of, way to expand on that discussion.
So cool. That's great. Thank you. And I'll look on Facebook and I'll respond to the comments too when we get off.
Can you give us a hint for those of us who are, literature fans? You don't have to tell us what it is, but maybe an obscure hint for us about what you might be doing next.
She's already said she can't. Respect the author's integrity.
Oh.
And I think that probably is a good. Do you have anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up, ladies?
Congratulations, Jillian. Kudos to you for another fabulous read. I just adored it. And I know readers out there everywhere are enjoying it now. And if you haven't picked it up, run out now and order from Poison Pen and get it to you so you can read. So it's so good.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think you guys have signed hardcovers because I signed some and shipped them to you. So if people want them. Congrats to you also. Heather, your book is a week old and the overnight guest is fabulous. And I know you're going to be talking about it next week. So I hope that people will come hear you and learn more about it then.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Jillian and Heather, whose Jillian's new book is Beautiful Little Fools. Heather's is The Overnight Guest. Both books we have copies of the Poison Pen. Heather will be here next week. Look on the Poison Pen's calendar of events for the date and time. You've been wonderful, very informative and entertaining. Thank you, Jillian. Thank you, Heather. And thank you. Those of us.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Thanks, Patrick. And thank you, Jillian.
Yeah, and thanks, Heather.
And with that, we'll conclude this event at the Poison Pen.